All right, can you all hear me? Is it okay? All right. First thing to explain about Split Rock is its name. Now, also to explain where it is. This is Onondaga Road. Right here, this is Fairmont Corners. There's the old James Geddes estate, George Geddes here. And then down here is Canada Hill, which the town of Onondaga and town of Camilla share. And this little community down here is Split Rock. At the end of Small Road, if you all know where Small Road is, at the end is a place they used to call Rockville. This was settled by the French Canadians. Split Rock was settled by the Irish. And there's actually another town over here that disappeared about the time this map was made. This map's from 1946. There's a little town at the intersection of Split Rock Road and Onondaga Road they call Faytown. But Faytown got its name because the Fays settled it in 1796. William Fay came here with a cow and a son. I'm not sure which order, but and he settled here. There were a lot of log cabins built on this corner. In fact, where the church is now is the Fay Tavern. In fact, somebody told me one time one of the houses up here still has a log cabin inside the house. Split Rock started along Split Rock Road. In fact, a lot of these buildings were just shanties built on top of the quarries. And Rockville was the French-Canadian settlement because the French would come down from Canada and work the quarries in the summer. Now, the reason Split Rock got its name was basically from the French-Canadians coming down from Canada. Split Rock here reminded them of Split Rock that they passed up in Essex County, which is over by Ticonderoga. Essex County has a Split Rock that has a hill on both sides, which is this, Split Rock and Canada Hill. And the Hudson River at that Split Rock divides the two. So this gully that they call, sometimes the valley, the gully, the gulf, this is Split Rock actually. This divides the two mountains of stone. And Split Rock was a mountain of stone. You'll see a picture later. There was actually a higher elevation here than you'll see today. Now it's pretty much level with the road. But Split Rock became such an important thing that it became a quarry name. Split Rock also is, when you hit limestone, it cleaves pretty evenly on the blow. It'll separate along the strata line. So Split Rock is also a quarry term to talk about how you cut stone. So then Split Rock in later years was known to be called Split Rock because of this quarry term. So the original name of Split Rock disappears, but it's actually because this gully with a bit of stream flowing through it separates the two hills. Now this map is 1846. By this time, Split Rock's already changed. Split Rock starts in 1796, but when this map was made, they had the Auburn and Syracuse Railroad line, which is up here, but already the railroad line that appeared from Split Rock down along Grand Ave is already disappeared. And I'll show you more of that when we get along. Now this is an 1860 map of Split Rock. Unfortunately, a lot of the visuals we have of Split Rock occur much later in time than the period I'm talking about. But in 1860, that pretty much was the way it looked in the 1840s. Here's what they call now Fay Road. This here is Onondaga Road. This section here is Split Rock Road. And then it stops here, Smurl's here, where Rockville is at the end of it. Cedarvale continues over to Howard Hill Road. And this section was pretty much the village of Split Rock. And you can't really see it, but the Fay house is listed. That's the stone house that exists on Split Rock Road. And depending on your age, it's either the old King house or the Romano house. But right next to it was a stone store that occupied that site from like 1830 to about 1890. And that was the center of the community, not burned area, but the stone store. And I'll show you a picture of the stone store. This is what it looked like, not much, for a community that at the time when this was built, about 1830, this was built, the community of Split Rock had 3,000 to 4,000 people. Syracuse didn't have that many. That's how important the stone operation was at Split Rock. And this was the community center, and you can't really see it, but right up here is a sign that says post office. Mr. Reagan, and this gets me on when reading the newspapers, his name is Burnett Reagan, but in the newspapers they call him Bernard or Barney Reagan, and that seems to be his nickname. Why, I don't know. But this is the Filer family. These are the children of Byron Filer, whose father was involved with the sudden death of his wife on Howard Hill Road, which we don't talk about. That's Howard Hill Road. That's their problem over there. But this was the center of the community. Now the thing, since I first wrote the book, I keep finding more information. Since I first wrote the book, I ran into a guy here from Utah. He had one of the ledgers from the store in 1840. It was only a 6 month period, but it told the history of the store. This wasn't just a general store. This store apparently was run by the Filers, another of the early families. They're a little later after the Fays. They come in 1800, when the Fays come in 1796. But the Filer family, which this is part of, has a store, and apparently it's a company store. They're also managing the Filer quarries. Now the Filer quarries are right behind it, which is what we call the state property today. They sold stone throughout here. They also would supply the workers with their equipment, boots and such. And there's a typical country store, or company store, I mean, as a typical company store. By the time the first payment came, their first paycheck came, they owed more money to the store than they had to pay. So the workers were always in debt. Now, one of the things about the company store, they also paid the wages of the men working in the quarry for this particular quarry. Apprentices got 75 cents a day, quarrymen got $1, expert quarrymen got $2, and actual stonemasons that knew how to cut the stone and square it up, they were paid by piece. So that's like information that's never existed. Most of the books you'll read will say quarrymen got $1 a day, but there's actually a scale of wages. And that's something that I just found out like within the last year. Now another version of the store, this is a little side view. Of course this store, nobody knows what happened to it. It disappeared about 1908, 1910. These are the Filers. I can't remember all the names, it's in the book, but I think this is Allie. This is Allie. Allie ends up marrying, after her two sisters died, she married one of the husbands. Then when he died, she married the husband of the other sister. And I think she actually found a third person. And this is Pug, the dog. This is Reagan. This is the oldest son of Byron Filer. This is Aaron, I think his name. I can't remember. It's in the book. But this is another view of the store. Just to give you an idea of how important this community was. But this little tiny store is the center of the community. I mean, this is before the church comes, the schools. So, and then just to give you an idea of an advertisement on the quarry, this is something that appeared in 1834. This is an ad. I don't know who Gilbert Coons is, but I suspect he is one of the storekeepers. Now, the storekeeper from this ledger was a Scotsman from Canada. He just came down to run the store. Apparently, Gilbert Coons is another one. He's just a storekeeper. He's not an owner of any property. His name doesn't appear on any deeds of the area. But it just tells you all the nice stone they have. Split Rock Quarry, undug gray limestone, bird's eye marble, and orders will be attended to at the quarry or by letter through the post office at Geddes. So it just gives you a little idea of the thing, of what's going on. Now, this map is not very good to see, and this map is from 1901, but, sorry, I'm in your way. No. But you can't really read it, but what happens in the 1840s, Irish settled Split Rock. All the quarry names that exist today for Split Rock still are remembered. There's the Degnan Quarry, the Filer Quarry, there's Crowley, Shanahan, and then there's names that come and go, Connors, O'Brien. On Canada Hill was the Wheaton Quarry, and then also sections of this were owned by James Geddes, and then later his son George Geddes. Give you an idea, this is on Duggar Road again, this is Split Rock Road again, it has that little dip in the road. But, so the quarry names are all named after the Irish, and they continue to be referred to that even today. Now, this is Split Rock Road, about 1894. Well, this was in an 1894 book. It's hard to describe actually when this picture was taken, because it might take several years to compile it into a book. But this apparently is near the stream that goes behind the church. And apparently you're looking west. And this mound up here that you can see is probably what they refer to as Shunner Hill. Shunner Hill wasn't just a hill, it was solid limestone. And this is why Split Rock was so important to the community, because this is a major ledge of limestone to be used into building construction and the Erie Canal. But apparently this hill was poured away by the time solid process moved in. This is the only picture that even shows how high this hill was, because now when you travel on Split Rock Road, this area is all level. So you don't even see a hill. And of course the factories are the TNT factories are put in place along this northern part of the road. Then there's a cow for reference. I don't know. I try to, and I'm sure this is looking west rather than east, because behind the church there is a higher elevation, but it's not as high as this. That's quite an elevation. That's not looking east. It has to be looking west. The thing that would have really decided would be the cow, because cows put their rear end to the wind. Yes.
So that's right about where the tenderfoot, existing tenderfoot comes into Split Rock Road?
Yeah, the church would probably be right about here. The road looks like it's bending because this is that little section of the road by the church that used to have like a V section, because apparently there was a house that was built right there where the road was before a road was even built. And yeah, this is like, yeah, the church would be like right over here. Then you have the new development off to the left here, and this would be continuing down toward Cedar Vale and Small Road. And it's in that location because there's only one place, and this is identified in the caption as Split Rock Road. There's only one location where the stream crosses Split Rock Road. Geddes Brook, which is over where Triple Landfill is now, that is after Split Rock Road ends and turns to the left into Cedar Vale. Harbor Brook is down where the intersection of Onondaga Road is and Split Rock Road, and that's quite a hill. This is a flat area, so it definitely is in that area, but the question could be argued which way you're looking, east or west. But this hill has to be what they call Shunner Hill. Why it's called Shunner Hill became a mystery, and Natalie found something in one of the books we have, Streetwise. Shunard is the son-in-law of Seymour, who was the governor, and he'll come into play after, in a second I'm going to explain the railroad. But apparently there's a connection between Shunard, his father-in-law, Governor Seymour, and Governor Seymour's father, who hires the man to build a railroad along Split Rock Road. Just to give you, just before I get to that, just to give you an idea, this is how quarrying would have existed back then. This picture is more like 1890, but you see the men have wheelbarrows, open wheelbarrows, wooden wheelbarrows. They're cutting the stone. In this case, they're really cutting the stone for the solid process. They're cutting small stone. But it gives you an idea of how they did work by hand. Now this picture also is later. You can see that there's light poles back here. But again, there's a wheelbarrow. They're doing the cutting by hand. And this shows you more of what they were doing in the early part of Split Rock. This picture was taken just prior to Solid Process moving in. Here they're doing what they call dimension stone or building stone. They're cutting the stone roughly, and there's actually drill marks here. They have a derrick here to lift it up into a wagon. There's another derrick back here. And this stone was used, again, for building and also for the Erie Canal. Truly, according to the New York State Museum bulletin, all the stone for the Erie Canal came from Split Rock. The original canal, not the large one that we really recognize today, but the original Clinton's Ditch, which was 40 feet wide. All the stone came from Split Rock, plus all the stone for the Oswego Canal, the Shenango Canal, and the Black River Canal came from Split Rock. And it just so happened, and here's another picture. This little child is not working there. Apparently he's just here for the picture. But what's happening, and here's another, let me just show this. There's another picture. It shows you how big the dimension stone could be. And this poor wagon is sagging from this. The poor mules, they're taking a nice rest before they go down the hill, which had to be terrible. I mean, they have a chain around the rear axle as a brake, but these animals have to go down quite a steep hill to get down to the level to bring it into Syracuse. Now, the reason Split Rock became so important for the Erie Canal was this fern. This is the hart's tongue fern, named that way because it resembles a deer's tongue or heart. This fern was discovered at Split Rock, and it still exists there today, but it was discovered there in 1807 by a man named Persh, Frederick Persh. Now, he found it on property owned by James Geddes, who's this man. James Geddes was a botanist. He had a little, and it's sad because his house is still there as Empire Credit Union, but behind the house when I first went there was a little barn that was probably from the early 1800s. There was one window that was lavender. That was probably where he did his botany. That he was so entranced with finding this fern that existed nowhere else in the United States. Now, there are other variations in Europe, but yes?
I have an old fern book I just discovered, and they had it out for Chittenango in
Yes.
Prince Falls as
They
well.
found-
I'll put that in for you.
Yeah, they found the fern later. This is the first time they found it, but
Initial
there's also a colony in Chittenango. They also, the state, because they were worried they were going to sell the property at Split Rock, they also transferred a lot of it down to Janesville by the steam generating plant, which after they built the steam generating plant, they tried to transport it back to Split Rock. So yeah, there's a whole other story. But so the fern is discovered 1807. He's a botanist. In 1808, he's chosen to be the chief surveyor of the Erie Canal, a year after the fern's discovered. Well, lo and behold, the man who picked him was Governor DeWitt Clinton, who was a botanist. So apparently, they probably got together over this fern. There's no guarantee that that's what happened, but logically, they got together over this fern. Well, then another thing happens. This fern is discovered in James Geddes' quarry. Split Rock now becomes the exclusive agent for stone for the Erie Canal. What a coincidence. That he finds this fern, gets in touch with DeWitt Clinton, and now Split Rock provides all the stone for the Erie Canal from the early beginning, 1817, to about the 1838, which is the time of his death. Then you start seeing other stone being built in the Erie Canal. And these are the kind of things they did is, the stone wasn't used all along the canal. It was used for locks, and it was used for aqueducts. And one of the famous aqueducts that was actually built totally out of Split Rock limestone is the Rochester Aqueduct, which still exists today. It's Route 31 or Monroe Ave in Rochester, right over the Genesee River. But this one is actually Montezuma Aqueduct. Now, the thing is, in 1838, or 1836 actually, it starts, they wanted to enlarge the Erie Canal. Originally it was 40 feet across. They want to double the width of it for canal boats because they're making money. Well, this is where this man comes in. This is Philip Midler. His house became Welter Funeral Home on James Street. Midler Ave is named after the family. But Philip Midler is from Fabius. Now, it's a coincidence that the man who hires him is the father of Governor Horatio Gates, whose father lives in Pompeii. And it's like a coincidence that all the canal contractors come from Pompeii. It just happens that, the father is a canal commissioner and he chooses his neighbors to build a canal. And of course, the Shenard Hill thing is the son-in-law of Governor Gates, or Governor Seymour, I should say. But they chose this man to now build a railroad to Split Rock in 1836. The trouble is, he's a canal engineer, and they chose him to build a railroad. Well, things don't work out too well. He would have been better off sticking to his trade. But they built this railroad, and it's a very simple railroad. It's just laid onto mud with logs going across. Then they have logs that are parallel to the tracks, and the tracks are actually just strap iron. They're just a very small thing, about 2.5 inches high. Well, they built this railroad along what is Grand Ave. Here's Syracuse. There's actually a Erie Canal Basin at the end of Geddes Street. It turns over here into Grand Ave, a nice curve, goes past Burnett Park, goes basically Westfield Schools here, comes out Bay Road through Taunton, crosses up to Split Rock Road, and ends at the end of Split Rock Road, which is pretty much where Small Road is today. This is a gravity railroad. What they actually do is they load up 2 cars of stone, like 2 tons each, and they roll them down this hill. And if you're aware of the hill, it's quite steep. So they're rolling these cars down the hill on tracks that are 2.5 inches high, and all they have is a very big handbrake. And the guy would stand there and then slow down the car appropriately. When it gets down to the end of Grand Ave, you have those kind of little loop hills that kind of would slow down the car. And then once it gets down closer to Geddes Street, horses would hook up to it and then take it down to the basin at the Erie Canal, and they would load the canal boats. Now, the first part of the Erie Canal that's completed is actually Utica to Syracuse. So the canal is in operation in the middle of the state. So they load up the canal boats with stone and take the stone out to the end of the canal and continue building it westward and eastward. This track also was it was designed to take freight, but it also took passengers. Now, at the time they built this, it was designed to take just freight, stone down. It was illegal in New York State at the time to build a railroad for freight. So they would allow passengers to ride on this. So they would have like these christening parties, like in 1838. They would take a little baby and they sit in these cars and they roll down the hill all the way down from Split Rock down to Geddes Street. And you got to imagine at the time, the only time you could go fast was to get on a fast horse. Now here is a family riding in these cars, maybe doing 40, 50 miles an hour down the hill. It had to be a tremendous speed when they're normally going, foot pace speed. Excuse me. Now at the end of Geddes Street, this is an 1868 bird's eye, and this kind of shows you at the end of Geddes Street what they would have done. They had a derrick there, and they could load stone onto the Erie Canal. This railroad existed basically a couple of years. What happens is in 1838, one thing happens, James Geddes dies. So Split Rock doesn't seem to be an exclusive quarry anymore. Plus the state passed an act that basically you couldn't have no bid contracts. You had to have the approval of the state government conduct railroad business. Now, it was part of the act. I mean, to actually build the railroad, they had to have a law passed through the legislature, but it became a problem with the way they were funded. Before, they were funded more by subscription. Now they're funded more by tax dollars. So now they have a different way. So basically, the railroad is failing because now they don't have the contract to expand the Erie Canal. And actually, in 1838, the canal expansion subsides for a while and doesn't continue until 1842. Well, by that time, the railroad's gone. Also, the canal commissioner, or the canal engineer, actually built a railroad. He didn't do a very good job of a foundation. There were constant problems with the rails sagging in the mud, because this is built along Harbor Brook, so it's marshy, they have a lot of problems, so the railroad doesn't pay for itself ever. Now, a lot of the people involved with it were prominent citizens in Syracuse. Moses Burnett and Wilkinson, who became postmaster. But it's not necessary anymore to have this railroad. So they pull up the rails and then they're sold for scrap. Yeah.
When you mean a basin, that was like a pullover in the canal part down there at Geddes and Erie Boulevard?
It doesn't show this, and the other map doesn't show it, but yeah, it's basically a gouged out area. It's actually a wider area in the Erie Canal where Geddes Street was.
Okay.
So the canal is like maybe twice as big in this one little section, just enough to pull off maybe a couple canal boats. And these are salt sheds behind here.
Wow.
But then you also see the railroads are coming in. Because Split Rock, the railroad that built the Split Rock, called the Syracuse and Onondaga Railroad, was actually the first rails laid in Onondaga County. Now, Auburn and Syracuse actually started a couple months before, and then it was actually completed a couple months before the one to Split Rock, but those rails started in Auburn. These rails actually were built starting in Onondaga County, so it's the first rails laid. And to show you the importance of Split Rock, though that railroad was built before they built the one a few years later to Utica. So it was important to get the stone out. Now the stone, originally when they were quarrying Split Rock, from the very early days up to the time Solvay Process moves in 1890, the stone is used for buildings. The main thing is the Erie Canal. Here's Clinton Square. You'll see a little better picture of this. This is the old county courthouse that sat on Clinton Square. Here's the Gridley building. That's all from Split Rock limestone. Now this is what the courthouse looked like, and most of you probably aren't as old as I am. You probably don't even remember this building. But this sat Clinton Square and Clinton Street behind here. And this is the third county courthouse, made entirely out of Split Rock limestone.
That became the Syracuse Police Department headquarters.
Yeah, and it was also, they had a part of it behind it, which was Split Rock limestone. Then it became the Board of Education for Syracuse, and then they tore it down. They wrote a book in 1964, Architecture Worth Saving. This was like the premier piece to save. They tore it down. The next thing they had in there, I can't remember now, but the first three items they said were the most important buildings to save. They tore all three of them down. So this was like the premier architecture in Syracuse in 1964, and it's long gone. Apparently they saved part of the bell tower here, but that's in question whether they saved all the pieces or not. This is also Clinton Square. This is the Gridley building, which is still there. That's all from Split Rock limestone. And this is not guesswork. These are actually cataloged in articles that geologists had written over the years in the 1880s, 1890s. In the back is City Hall. You can barely see it. Just to digress, this is probably the first building built of Split Rock limestone. This is the King House or Romano House on Split Rock Road. the date on the side of the house on the left says 1833, but it seems like the house was originally built in 1817, and I have a feeling that this section was built first, and then this more elegant section was added in 1833. But this is the earliest house on record being built from split rock limestone. This is another building, you won't recognize it today. This is the Loomis Hill Schoolhouse. Harris Road is on the other side of the building. Hollow Hill Road's here. And of course, they changed the structure so it has a gambrel roof. But this is the way it was. And this was actually paid for by Alfred Filer after his wife's tragic death. We'll just say that. Before he ended up in the Old Main psychiatric ward.
Why did he look at
Something
Phyllis, his family.
Yeah, oh, that's right, I should be looking at that. Another one of the buildings that came entirely from Split Rock is SU's Hall Languages, which is still there today. Unfortunately, they took this 3-story building, they made it 4 stories inside. Stephen Crane, the famous author, used to walk the floors, and people would say he actually walked the floors of this building. Well, they removed all the wooden floors and now they're concrete, so it's not quite the same anymore. My first class, by the way, SU was right down here in the cellar. That's what they call the SU crapper. That's another story. But, he was a janitor that would defecate on desks at night, but my boss at the Syracuse Police Department actually hid in a closet and caught him down in this room. So he got away with it. His aunt was one of the deans of the school. This also is up at SU. This is from Split Rock Limestone. This is the Holden Observatory, all Split Rock Limestone. Different style, a little bit rougher cut. This is what they used to call St. Mary's on Columbus Circle. The color's off. This was just recently restored. This came from 2 quarries up at Split Rock. Crowley Quarry, which is down where Rockville used to be at the end of Smorrel, and the Hughes Brothers Quarry, who took over from the Filers. That's sort of where the state property is down. That's the Hughes Brothers Quarry. And I always had a confusion because I didn't know where these towers came from. Well, these towers, I just found out, weren't built to 1909. By that time, Split Rock was out of the building stone business. These actually came from Batavia in 1909. The stone was very similar and blended in with the Split Rock limestone. Just a little thing I found. This is the old post office, which is on Warren Street, and I think this is Fayette. One of the banks occupies it now. This building's still here. Hunter Plaza, which used to be the old McCarthy store, is back here. And they refer to this sometimes as the Federal Building, but this is all Split Rock limestone. Now this is one of the later buildings. This is again SU. The only limestone from Split Rock is the base here. And this is what they were calling beautiful back in 1890, because now they took the brick and contrast it with the limestone from Split Rock, the nice gray limestone. Most people considered this beauty in 1890. When they got to build this building in 1890, they said it was boring because it was all one color. They thought it was, a travesty that the city got rooked on building a building like this. Now, this building was in doubt for, its origin was in doubt for a long time because it came out of the Hughes Brothers Quarry. Well, that's all the references would say, because it became a problem because Hughes Brothers had quarries at Split Rock, Onondaga Reservation, and Fulton. But I finally found an article in 1890 that the Hughes Brothers were having a strike at Split Rock in 1890, and they said it wouldn't delay the construction of the City Hall, because by the time the strikers had their strike, they had all the stone cut for it. So all they had to do was transport it. So it's one of those things with strikers at Split Rock. They always wait until the worst moment to have a strike, and they never seem to win their wage increases. Now, this is just getting into another time period at Split Rock. Late 1800s, Split Rock is starting to slow down for building stone. In fact, one of the last things they do, besides the last two buildings I showed you, they build the locks at Jordan and Port Byron. Now, if you go to Port Byron today along the thruway, Erie Canal. The Erie Canal is actually still across the street, but okay, that thing they call the thruway, they have a little rest area there, and they have a museum for Port Byron. All that stone also came, well, that stone also came from Split Rock. There's actually a portion of that lock that's a darker gray, kind of cruddy limestone. I don't know where they got that from, but that nice gray, smooth-looking limestone is actually from Split Rock. And also the Jordan lock came from Split Rock in the 1880s. So Split Rock, even though they didn't have the exclusive contract for the Erie Canal anymore, they were still providing stone for the Erie Canal. Now, they provided what is called a facing stone, where the boats would lock. The stone behind it, the banking stone, actually came from Union Springs. Why, I don't know. They must have had a relative, the government must have had a relative down in Union Springs. But what happens now is Salve Process is operating in the village of Salve. They're looking for small pieces of stone to put into their soda ash operation. They need the smaller stone. They don't need these great big blocks of stone. So the Hughes brothers, which is where this is, this structure here actually exists to this day. So now what they're doing is breaking up smaller stones. They have this ramp. They back up a horse and cart here, dump the stone into this bin, and it goes into a crusher here. And it's ground up into smaller pieces, and then it's transported by first wagon to Salve Process, but then later what they call the bucket line. They actually had a bucket line going. Now, this was actually built in 1881. Salve Process will end up taking over this section of property in 1889. They built this elevated bucket line from Salve Process in the village all the way to this spot. And they claim it's an elevated railroad. Well, it's kind of a problem because it's not for public, it's for their own private use. So they actually take over the Hughes brothers' property by just building on top of it and say, well, it's ours now because we're here. And at the time, Salve Process starts buying up land on Split Rock. Now this also shows the wagons backing up to drop stone into that crusher. Now this is before Salve Process moved in, because you can see there aren't the company houses down here yet, which start being built in 1894. So this is still the old operation. Now what happens is Salve Process comes in, and you can barely see it. There's a bucket line here. It goes through this traction house, the power of the bucket line, and takes it over to Salve. So they come in and say, well, this is our land. They start building an office here and take over. Well, the Hughes brothers get angry and say, well, you shouldn't do that. It's our property. So they have a lawsuit. It goes through several years of litigation. The Hughes brothers win, except now they're so poor, and now they have this quarter strike going on, they end up selling the property to Salve Process. So then they move in, and basically then they start building these company houses down here in the Gulf, and eventually the tri line will run through here. But then that continues the next lecture, which is what Salve Process does with Split Rock. So the whole atmosphere changes. Now that's really the end of it, but there's things I forgot too and going through. One of the things in 1854, each state could provide one piece of stone for the Washington Monument. So there was less than 35 states. There's 34 states at the time. In New York State, they chose Split Rock to provide that piece of limestone. It's appropriately engraved. I haven't seen it. I always wanted to walk up the steps of the Washington Monument and see it, but that was in 1854. So Split Rock limestone is actually a national monument. And the stone was used all around New York State. They didn't use it down at the Old Main. If you go on these tours of Old Main down in Utica, they use cruddy stone, river stone from Stittsville, and they're having problems with their structure because when you lay limestone in the building, you're supposed to lay it as a bed. They laid it on its side, and now it's separating, and they're having all these problems with it. And I complained, and I told them, and they agreed with me, they should have hired somebody better. But Split Rock limestone was considered the best stone in the state, and actually probably on the East Coast. But that's pretty much it. I kind of went through, I probably forgot a lot of things. But any questions? Yes?
Why were they selling bird's eye marble at the store, the Filer's store? Because I just looked it up, and it's like gorgeous.
Oh, yeah.
Is it like,
The stone in Split Rock, if you were here for the geologist, there are different grades of stone, and these men knew how to pick stone in the quarry. I mean, quarrymen know what stone is good for building, what stone is good for salvage process, and there is some very fine limestone that looks pretty much like marble. In fact, a lot of the buildings around Syracuse, you'll see the different limestone, like SU's whole language is pretty nice in limestone, but you go look at the Immaculate Conception Church downtown, I don't know what kind of deal they got, but they got what they call rotten limestone. It's filled with fossils. And what happens is, as the weather wears down the stone, the fossils wear differently, and it leaves a ragged look to the structure. And so, that's their problem, But limestone typically cut by hand was pretty solid. Now, what happens to the demise of the stone cutters up at Split Rock is they start buying cut stone from Indiana, like Carnegie Library downtown and the county courthouse. That's all Indiana buff limestone. The quarrymen complained at the time. They said, that's terrible because that limestone's cut by machinery and it won't wear easily, it'll flake. And you look at Split Rock buildings cut Onondaga limestone, they're beautiful. You look at the county courthouse, there are sections that are pretty rough where the limestone is flaked off of it. So those guys are right. So they knew what they were doing. They know a lot more about it than I do. Yes?
What's the big deal about this fern?
It's rare. Now they found it other places, but it's just one of those things like the dart minnow. It's one of those things, and I'm not the kind of I'm more into history than ecology, but if you lose it, it's like history. If you don't write it down, if you lose it, you never get it back. It's like the dodo bird. Okay, so the dodo bird's gone, but there's still people that would have liked to seen it. And it's a rare fern that only grows in this section of North America. So it's rare.
strap fern grows up this wide, and you know what ferns look like when they unfold? It's flat and wide. You see a bird's nest fern. It's similar to that. You see them with some of the big box firs. Rarely, but you see bush go there.
It's just one of the things where it is now. It's Split Rock. It doesn't have to be disturbed. So it's like most of Split Rock, you leave it alone, it's fine. It's when you interfere with it, you create all kinds of problems.
There's a lot of stuff missing though, right?
Yeah, a lot of structures missing. Yes.
Can you imagine the thousands of stones in those buildings? How many quarrymen, cutters were there? Because these stones are like this, they're cut on all sides.
Yeah, but
And-
typically in the early days, all the quarries are separate. The Irish families ran each
Yeah.
quarry, but typically there was like 300 men working in the quarries, maybe even as many as 2,000. In the heydays when they were building the Erie Canal, they were coming down from Canada. There were actually coal miners were coming up from Pennsylvania because they were used to blasting, and they would cut the stone. But yes, and I can't imagine.
Forty and everything.
I can't imagine how many cubic yards are missing, but when I went up to Split Rock with the geologist that spoke earlier, Bryce Hand, he mentioned, he was showing me the layers. There are 2 layers of limestone, the Manlius and the Onondaga, and each layer is like 40 feet. And he pointed way up above us. He said, that's the beginning of the Onondaga. And we were at what was called the Lower Rock, and all I can imagine is, hundreds of feet above us was limestone, and it's all gone. You can't even imagine how much they quarried out of that place. And a lot of it, when you see the next lecture, a lot of it goes for baking soda and soda ash. And there was this comment, it always intrigued me. You don't realize how much stone was eaten by people, using baking soda. I can imagine a big teeth, chewing on split rock. That should be like a t-shirt. But yeah, I can't even fathom, many times I've been up there, I can't fathom.
On behalf of all of us, we all like to thank Rich very much for yet another. Are there any more questions for Rich?
Yeah, there's one back here.
I just want to know if you comment a little bit on the plank road. Did that essentially follow the railroad?
Yes, and then these are things I forgot. That's why I wrote everything in the book, because it's there. But yes, once they took up the railroad, basically they had logs that still left there. They only took up the strap iron. Yes, and then they continued the plank road on top of that. And that was always a bone of contention. Was that really so? But there is a map, and I didn't show it, it's in the book, but there's a little section off Grand Ave of the plank road, and it says Old Railroad. So yes, it did continue, and then when you look at the surveys for both the railroad and the plank road, yes, they match up. So yes, they are the same road. But that's always been a matter of question, because a lot of the early history, when people talk about this stuff, they assume you know where it is. Like they'll talk about the old stone store, like everybody knows where that is. Well, it's long gone. If you don't have a map, and there are very few of them, and they're much later, well, then you don't have an idea of where things are. Because one of the things, the next lecture, the old stone store was called the Reagan store. And then in 1907, there was a robbery at the Reagan store. Well, I assumed it was the same store, but no, he moved his business down the street across from the old Rock Inn. There's a building there now, it's boarded up. That became the Reagan store. When they talk about the Reagan store, you have to try to figure out which one they're talking about. And Split Rock's all like that. All their history is like, you have to very, very carefully sift through it to try to figure out what they're talking about. Well, I'll go ahead first.
Yeah, west of the area you're talking about, there's a place called Lost Lake. Was that part of the quarry too?
Yeah, that is actually part of the quarry. That's where the old Shanahan quarry was.
Okay, is that the farthest one west?
Yeah, for Split Rock, but
Yeah.
quarries dotted the whole ledge all the way, all the way through the town of Onondaga. I mean, I just talk about Split Rock to try to keep it central, but there are quarries on Bellevue and Velasco and all over the place. I mean, they go right down to the Indian Reservation.
You were talking about keeping the different names separate, the names that are the same. In my grandfather's diary, which the town has, there were 3 Georges. One was the son, one was the hired man, and one was the horse. And you have to keep in your mind what they're talking about.
Yeah.
Because they just say, I took George and went to the city. They say George the horse or George the son.
Yeah, it's like that. I mean, people assume, and you'll read that in the newspaper articles, they'll talk about a fire in some place. Like they'll talk about a fire at the House of Providence, and most of us think House of Providence is the one now. But the old House of Providence was what they were talking about on Grand Ave, where next to the Children's Asylum. That burned down, and then they built the new one where it is now, but I think that burned as well. So then when they're talking about fire, which fire and which house? So it does get confusing.
Young man, Rich, your grandfather's diary. I remember that distinction. I just want to say a few words in appreciation, not that Dick is finished with his presentations for the year. We have 2 more lectures. But it's been a rare find for us. I don't know of any community in the state of New York or the United States that has an expert on their region. This man has spent 40 years of his life studying Split Rock exclusively.
It's only been 34. And I live in Syracuse.
And he lives in Syracuse besides. And
Eastwood.
in anticipation of this celebration year, it's not a celebration, it's a memorial year, he writes 4 books. And these are all limited edition books. It's not available in very few places. He distributes them through the Onondaga County Library,
Onondaga County
Museum downtown.
Onondaga Historical Association and here.
And here. And, you know, these are going to be legacies for the families of the future. I bought them all. He didn't give them to me. He was on his friend. He made me buy them.
No discounts.
No discount. And I've read them all. And they're a technical reference in some ways. And then in other ways, they're an enjoyable, almost a novel describing the people and the activities in the area, you know, over these many years. They're a wonderful set. If you don't buy them for you and your family, you're going to be sorry. And I just wanted to say that. I encourage you to do it because these are limited edition and I'm not going to be back again. So
Yeah,
please think
yeah.
about that.
Yeah,
Judy?
and
I just wanna know, Rich, what got you started in that? What,
well, it all begins with Justina Foley's book. You know, it's like you read this little book, and it's like there's more to it than that. And every time you get an answer, you get 6 more questions, and it just goes on and on.
so reading that book got you interested?
Yes, plus I ran across a college friend of mine at Onondaga Savings Bank, Jim McLaughlin. We did a video of Split Rock before it was totally destroyed. And he said, well, I can take you up there. And we used to go up there all the time. And we used to see hundreds of foundations, which are still dozens.
What year was that, Rich?
1984, about when we started. Actually, we were still at the bank, so like 82, I think 82, we started going up there. So, okay, maybe it's 36 years. But you see this place and you gotta see, oh my God, there were hundreds of buildings up here, what was going on? And then I started talking to people, and it turned out there's still at least a dozen and a half people still alive that remember the explosion. So then you start talking to them, and then you start getting more of the general background, because all the newspaper will tell you are events, like the explosion, this happened. The people will tell you like more of the background, the day-to-day, how they felt, the poisoning, all that kind of stuff. So it just builds from there. There's always something more. And now, like, I'm tracking down this one soldier that was killed in the explosion. Now I have another problem, because I ran across an article in 1920, the missing men. I have a page of missing men, and there's always a question because some of those missing men weren't really missing. They left their wives, or people gave phony names to get into the morgue. Well, it turns out from this article, 41 of those missing men were killed. So the total now for Split Rock is 90, not 50. So now I have even more names to find, and I probably will never find them, but they're somewhere in that list. So there's always some area I can never answer, you know, and everything always leads to something else.
Yeah. Do you know now who owns Canada?
It's Mr. Gasparini, yes.
He owns Gasparini on
Yes.
that? And how about, no, Canada, he owns Canada?
The whole hill, yes, and he takes very good care of it. He keeps people off of it, he keeps people from stealing stone, and
Okay.
it's up there.
Out where the state used to have their DPW,
Yes, that's still owned by the state.
that's still owned by the state?
It's still owned by the state. The trolley line's owned by the county, they still have that.
The what?
The trolley line, the golf,
Oh, yes.
that's still owned by the county.
Yes.
And then there's some private property, Tripoli landfills, what used to be the Shanahan Quarry. Of course, along Split Rock Road, you know, there's private residences. And then the other area of Split Rock is all housing now. It's down by that road, Beverly. I knew it was a girl's name. Beverly, you know, that was part of Split Rock during the munitions area, because Selby Presses pretty much ended up buying all the land right down to West Genesee Street. So they sold that, and they kept their property pretty clean. I mean, nobody has to worry about pollution. It's only if you go to the lake, that's where they took it all.